नहीं हो रहा. Hello, we would start with the expected questions, and in the expected questions for science and technology we would be continuing with our series, and this would be the second part that we would continue. So when we are talking about this, let's talk on with the or start with the Nobel Prizes first. So Nobel Prizes are really not important, they are not directly asked in the examination, still you need to know a lot of those. So let's say we start with the Nobel Prize in chemistry. So who all win the Nobel Prize and what was the reason for it is something that you need to know. So for chemistry it was basically for developing cryo-electron microscopy. Then for physics you have the list of the winners and it was for gravitational waves, and similarly you have it for biology or physiology we can say, and that was to control the circadian rhythm. Now in India, in Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Nobel laureates seminar was held, and from India you have 5 Indians who have so far won the Nobel Prize, and besides that there are 7 people of Indian origin. The 5 from India are Rabindranath Tagore for literature, then you have Mother Teresa for peace, Dr. C.V. Raman for physics, Amartya Sen for economics, and Kailash Satyarthi for peace. However, Sri Aurobindo was nominated once for literature and once for peace, but he was only nominated. So those are some of the things that you need to know. So moving on to the next thing is the biggest and the most powerful X-ray laser gun. Now the name is XFEL. Now this is the name of a European X-ray laser gun, which is X-ray free electron laser, and this was unveiled in the Germany. So this is again important. Indian National Center for Ocean Informatics has started a kind of forecasting services, and that is mainly for the 3 countries. Those are the Comoros, Madagascar and Mozambique. So the 3 countries are important. The next important thing that you need to know here is Vercius. So Vercius is the smallest surgical robot that has been developed by the UK scientists. Okay, so this is one of the very smallest surgical robots that has been developed, and it can basically mimic the human arm. So those things are really important. Now these are kind of small news in science and technology field, but definitely these could be a part of your question. Now again, turmeric is considered to have unique qualities to cure basically diseases, specifically cancer, and we have found a chemical which is known as curcumin, which is a kind of bioactive compound which is found in turmeric, and it can basically destroy the neuroblastoma tumor cells. Then you have some apps that have been released, for example the quake maintenance app for the quake hit regions. Then you have the RM mobile app. Now this app is mainly for the road maintenance. So these are some of the important apps that have been covered. The next is methane hydrate, very important. Off and on there are questions related to environment, and methane hydrate could be an important section for those. Now methane hydrate, China recently successfully produced natural gas from methane hydrate in the South China Sea region, and if this becomes a reality, a lot of production of natural gas could be seen, and this would be really beneficial for the people around. The next is the Deep Ocean Mission of India. Now this has been launched by the Ministry of Earth Sciences. The idea is to do the research for the ocean areas and work around the human resource technology for expansion and development in the ocean areas or the coastal areas. Again, under this you have one very important project, which is seawater desalinization. Now what is the idea is, so far there is no potable drinking water, and to eliminate the issue of potable drinking water that is good for health, what we need to do is we need to desaline the sea waters or the ocean waters, and the desalinization plant is therefore important. Again, we have deep ocean explorations through which polymetallic nodules could be discovered in the ocean areas. China has done a lot of discoveries in the recent time, definitely a landmark. So we would be discussing some of the important news from China now. So this time the first important thing that we need to understand is the artificial heart that has been developed using a rocket technology. So that's a really breakthrough achievement in medical sciences, where you are bringing in rocket technology for developing artificial heart. This has been done by TEDA International Cardiovascular Hospital. Then similarly, photovoltaic roads have been tested in China. China is the second country after France to have photovoltaic roads. Now I have a question from Sam here. He wants to prepare for next year, but he is still confused where to start. So when you are starting your preparation, I would recommend NCRTs are the best. So start preparing with NCRTs, and then have a good pace on the current affairs, the recent happenings in and around the world. The next thing here is the Chinese remote sensing satellite Hyagong 30 project. Now this is a project for remote sensing, really very important. The third batch has been launched for this project, and this has been launched from the Xinjiang province of China. The next is Tiangong 1. Now this is China's space lab to Earth, and it's a kind of project that talked about that was launched in the mid of the South Pacific Ocean. So you have a kind of spacecraft graveyard that has been put up there, and therefore it's important. So Tiangong 1 is basically a heavenly place or a celestial place 1 that was the first prototype station of China. Now China has also launched two Beidou 3 navigation satellites. So it's Beidou 30 and Beidou 31. Both of those are important. Beidou basically means compass. So it's basically a compass based satellite navigation system that has been launched. Again, the world's largest amphibious aircraft in the name of AG600 or Kunlong has been launched again by China. So some of the important landmarks by China has been mentioned here. The next is the first hybrid electric tram that has been again developed by China using hydrogen cells. So hydrogen is abundantly found in the atmosphere. So if that could be used to create a hybrid electric tram, it would be a very good initiative in the field of transportation sector. So this has been really a breakthrough invention done by China. Then again LKW2 has been launched, and this is a kind of second surveying satellite that has been launched by China. So as we said in this section of science and tech, we would be primarily focusing on space, defense, and the various missions to space. The next is the automated container terminal now is open in China. It's mainly in the Yangshan deep water provinces in the Shanghai area. This is again important because it's the world's largest automated container terminal that has been opened up. China has been into cloning. There was a lot of controversy when the dolly was cloned. Dolly was basically a sheep, and China recently cloned monkeys in the name of Zhangzhang and Huahua. So those are Zhongzhong and Huahua. Those are the two monkeys that have been cloned, and they have been cloned using the technique which is known as somatic cell transfer technique. We have discussed about this in more detail, where we have talked about the expected questions on biology. The next is in the space sciences, Casey-Huygens has returned from the Saturn, and it's basically now retired. This has been described as mission of first, has been very, very important because it has brought in a lot more information about Saturn to Earth. A lot more information about the moons of the Saturn has been released. Now this was a collaborated project of 3 agencies, that was United States NASA, then you have Europe's European Space Agency, and Italy's Italian Space Agency. So these 3 together had this project Casey that was released and is important. What is ASPIRE? It's again important. The acronym is Advanced Supersonic Parachute Inflation Research Experiment. Now this has been done by NASA, and it basically tests the supersonic Mars landing parachute. This has been also released by NASA's Wallops Flight Facility, which is based in United States. So those are some of the important things that you need to know here. The next is the InSight mission. Now NASA's first InSight mission was to understand the interior parts of the Mars, and for that you had the InSight project. The acronym for this is Interior Exploration Using Seismic Investigations, Geodesy and Heat Transport. So 3 techniques have been used for this. That's seismic investigation, geodesy and heat transport. So with this you have the InSight mission talking about the details of Mars. Now sometimes there could be a direct question, what is an InSight mission? So many of you might just not strike with an answer that it's something to do with space technology. So make sure when you come across terms, you try to relate it, memorize it in certain fashion so that you don't get confused while the exam comes in. Now TESS, very important, it basically talks about exploring the exoplanets. So TESS along with NASA and SpaceX has basically partnered to search for the exoplanets, and this has been done using the transit method. TESS is basically the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, and SpaceX has been one of the leading partners for the same. TOPIX and Poisson, very important, they are the first satellites to measure the changes in the sea level. Now this is again in news because of the recent issues of environment. So environmental issues again become important. Make sure you focus on those. Now I have a question from Sampriti. She asks about the current affairs related to NET. So for NET we have already covered the sections on education, the expected classes. We have a lot more in schedule, so you can just go on to the Examrace live event schedule and you would find all the upcoming events there. We would have further more sessions for NET after your prelims examination. Now NASA launches the Joint Polar Satellite System 1. So this has been launched in space. This is a kind of next generation satellite that has come, and this is a joint venture of NASA as well as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Studies. Then very important thing, ISRO lost its contact with GSAT-6A recently. Now orbit racing is one of the term that was in news because of it, because orbit racing are basically the maneuvers by which the satellite can be taken into the final orbit in its stages. So at that point the contact was lost, and therefore GSAT-6 was in news. Again we had the IRNSS 1H that failed, and the failure was accounted to heat shield. Now what is heat shield? Basically at the time of separation of the payload, or what we call as payload fairing, the separation did not took place in the second stages of the orbit, and therefore there was a kind of heat shield, and that led to the failure of IRNSS 1H. So you have 1L that would be released shortly. So you have, as I said, 1L that would be that has been released. Okay. So that was a kind of replacement for 1H. The next is Aditya L1, very important. This is ISRO's mission to Sun. So far we were talking about Mars, we were talking about Mangalyaan, Chandrayaan, Mars and Moon. Now we are moving on to Sun, and this would first take off in 2019. The mission is basically to understand the Langley's point. So Langley's point is basically the region where you have two celestial bodies, let's say Earth or Sun or Earth or Moon, and then you are trying to find the impact on the third. So that's where you talk about the Langley's point. So Aditya L1 mission is dedicated to it, and the objective is basically to study the outermost layers of the Sun, that's the corona and the chromosphere then, and collect the data about the coronal mass of the Sun. The next is ISRO and BHEL have come together for what we say the space grade lithium ion cells. Now lithium ion cells have been widely used in space projects, so this has been a good idea for that, and therefore it's important. The next is the MOM, that's the Mars Orbiter mission. It has completed 3 years in orbit so far, and it is also known as the Mangalyaan mission by India. The next is GSAT-17. This has been successfully launched from French Guiana. So some of the recent launches and releases by ISRO, we would be discussing those. Now this GSAT-17 basically has a normal C-band, extended C-band and S-band. However, these informations are not much useful for your prelims examination, but definitely when you have a kind of long answer question for your mains based on space technology or developments in the space sciences, you need to know these topics. Then we have another important landmark by ISRO. You have nearly 6.1 million euros that have come up from 29 nano projects that have been launched. Now ISRO Plus, you have a commercial arm which is Entrix, which basically reserves the space for the foreign arms or the foreign launches to be part of the ISRO, and Entrix basically provide the launch facility per annum, which is usually 2 for each of the regions. And then it sells whatever the additional space is left, it sells it out to the other countries. Now we have the NICER mission. NICER mission is again very important. It's a very expensive earth imagery satellite system which would cost nearly $1.5 billion. Now NICER is basically NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar, and it would have a kind of dual frequency synthetic aperture radar system which would be developed by 2021. It would study the environmental changes and the issues of disaster and disaster management in India. Then you have the HISIS. What is HISIS is again important. HISIS is basically a kind of Earth's observation system where you have hyperspectral imaging satellites that have been used. So far you have 55 spectral bands from nearly 630 kilometers above the ground that have been part of it. Then you have the Indian GPS system in the name of Naviac. This is a kind of indigenous GPS that we have developed, a Make in India initiative. So it's in the name of navigation with Indian constellations, and the other name, the abbreviation for it is Naviac. It's again very important. So it basically consists of 7 satellites which provide information on 3 important things, which is known as P&T, position, navigation and timing. So those 3 issues have been discussed under this. We have launched nearly 31 satellites with PSLV rocket, of which you have numerous satellites, nearly 29 satellites from foreign countries. These 29 satellites were from 14 different nations, and the total weight of the 30 satellites was nearly 243 kilograms. It also included Cartosat in this mission. Then you have the ISRO's numerous successful missions that have come up. The failure of the 1H we have already talked about, that was because of the heat shield. Then Entrex we have already discussed why it is important, how India has taken over the record that was established by Russia, and ISRO basically launched 104 satellites in one go, and that was a record in comparison to Russia's record of 137. So that's again one of the important discoveries. Then you have PSLV. As we know, it's a kind of polar satellite launch vehicle. Now under the launch vehicles you have those following sun synchronous orbit or geosynchronous orbit. We have a complete detail on those. So those are available in the separate video. You can just go to that video on geosynchronous satellites and sun synchronous satellites to understand these concepts in a kind of much smoother way. Otherwise you must always be burdened with remembering the terms geosynchronous, sun synchronous and so on. If you go through that, it becomes much more easier and you have the concept to memorize it. Then you have Entrex Corporation. Now Entrex Corporation, as we said, is the commercial arm of ISRO, which brings in the foreign satellites for launch vehicle in India. Now we are aligning with various projects through the Bhuvan portal. Now Kurukshetra May edition talks about the Bhuvan. So when we are covering the Kurukshetra May recently, we would talk more about Bhuvan in detail. Basically it's a kind of geospatial platform. It's an application service that has been developed in collaboration with ISRO, and it's planning to mark out the major cities, the hydel power projects in India, the various potential areas in India, and all would be under a one head or one portal which would be known as Bhuvan portal. The next is, what was the ISRO's 100th satellite? So 100th satellite was the Cartosat 2 satellite, the Cartosat 2 series, and therefore it's important. Cartosat basically means for cartographic purposes, understanding the rural and the urban applications of the same. Now some of the summary of the developments that have taken so far, you have the MOM project, that's the Mars orbital mission, or which is also known as the Mangalyaan project. The next is the Astrosat. Astrosat is basically talking about the celestial sources or the celestial bodies. Then you have RLV, very important. It's a reusable launch vehicle, and India has successfully test fired in 2016. The scramjet, again, it's very important. It's a kind of air breathing propulsion system that has been successfully conducted by India. Now we have a kind of surprise time for you. I have a question for you. The person who gives the first answer would be the winner for this. So you have the question here, looking for the answers as quickly as possible. So the question here is, which of the following is not a potential 2G biofuel? I am waiting for the answers to come in. We have taken a class on national policy on biofuels, which would be live shortly, and you can understand what are 1G, 2G and 3G biofuels. Very important. Any answers coming up? Any guesses for the question? So I would wait for a kind of few more seconds here. So as I said, you have 1G, 2G and 3G biofuels, the national biofuel policy that was released recently around 3 or 5 days back. Very, very important for your pre as well as your mains. Now under biofuels, so Thomas has the first correct answer, that's algae. That's very great. Now Jatropha, wood chips and switchgrass, all of these three belong to a 2G biofuel category. So we have 1G, 2G and 3G. 1G talks about those that could be used from food crops. 2G from the food crop that is not useful for human consumption or any other sources. So all these three are not basically for food crops. So you have all these three that lie under 2G. Previously, algae was also considered under 2G biofuel, and that's why I had this question and some of you got confused here. So a lot of correct answers now. So algae has now been taken out from 2G and it's put in a separate category, which is 3G biofuel. Very, very important. The next thing that we would be going on, so just wait for the surprise, the winner. The next is the Chandrayaan 2. Now Chandrayaan 2 launch was postponed in 2018, and that's again important. So make sure you are aware of the various missions that have been taken through. Now this mission has been planned through the GSLV MK2 and therefore it's a kind of geosynchronous satellite. It's important. The next is Astrosat. As we already talked about, it works around the celestial objects and for the first time it accomplishes a kind of X-ray polarization. So that's again some of the important discoveries. The next is Stratolaunch. Now what is the Stratolaunch? It's the world's first largest aircraft with past engines, and it's basically a kind of private company which is in the name of Stratolaunch that has tested different 6 turbo fan engines on the aircraft for the first time. So the launch by the company is very, very important here. The next is BIRSAC. It has celebrated its 6th Foundation Day. BIRSAC basically talks about the biotechnology industry and research assistance. So it's again important. Then India and EU has signed an agreement to share the information from the Earth observation satellites mutually, and this would basically strengthen the developments that have been taking place for the Earth observation systems. The next is the Indian Science Congress was held in Manipur in Imphal. The theme was reaching the unreached through science and technology, and that's why you had Northeast as one of the centers where the Science Congress was conducted this time. Now we have some of the important species. We have talked about most of the species in our class on environment. Some of those what have been left we have tried to cover up here. So it's again important, every off and on you have a question on the endemic species, the species which has shifted from endemic to vulnerable and so on. So the new species that has been discovered is Drypetes calami, and this has basically been found in the Buxa and the Jaldapara National Parks in West Bengal. Then you have Hyperloop. So first Hyperloop in India between Vijayawada and Amravati. Then you have another Hyperloop being planned between Mumbai and Pune. This has been done with the Virgin Group, and it's basically the Richard Branson who leads this group, and the actual distance of 3 hours would be reduced to only 20 minutes between Mumbai and Pune. The next is Progress MS-08. This is a kind of unmanned Russian space mission to space station, and this is again important. Google launched Suraksha Check Kiya campaign, that is to create awareness among people related to cyber security and cyber systems. So protecting the people, safeguarding the data was one of the key concerns. 10th November is celebrated as a World Science Day internationally, and it's the World Science Day for peace and development. So using science for peaceful purposes and development purposes is important. So those are some of the important discoveries here. Then very important, two mountains on Pluto have been named after two mountaineers. One is the Tenzing Norgay, she is basically Indian Nepalese we can say, and the second is Edmund Hillary from New Zealand. So both of those, after the name of these, you have the two mountains that have been named as Tenzing Montes and Hillary Montes. So those are the name of the two mountains that have been put up in, basically have been discovered in Pluto. The next new species that we talked about, The first one was in the Baksa and the Jaldapara, and that was a plant species. Here you have a edible fish species that has been discovered in the Pampa river in Kerala in the name of Labio filicerus, so that's again important. Hyperloop in Andhra Pradesh we have already talked about. Then you have Melpe Plate, very important. Melpe Plate is basically a microplate or a smaller plate. It is named after the Colombian island, and it is basically on the line of the oceanic ridge. It has been discovered by scientists from Rice universities in the United States, and it is the 57th microplate which is tectonic has been discovered. So those are some of the important things that we cover here. The next is world's first floating wind farm has been established in Scotland, and this has been done by High Wind project. So it's again important here. India and US have worked together for the C17 deal, which is a kind of global master from United States, a very important deal that has come up. The next is the aeronautical test range has been developed in Chitradurg in Karnataka. So this is again one of the important efforts by India. Now some of the news that we would be covering now are kind of very smaller news, so even the headlines, what happened where, would be enough for you to have a kind of last minute revisions for those. So Rustom 2, it's a kind of India's combat capable drone which has been launched recently. So what is Rustom 2? Could be a direct question for you. So it's basically a kind of indigenous unmanned aerial vehicle that has been launched. Then next is India and Russia have agreed to double the capacity of BrahMos missile. Now BrahMos, the name comes from Brahmaputra and Moswak. Brahmaputra is a river in India and Moswak is a river in Russia. So it's basically an Indo-Russian project, and we are trying to double the capacity for BrahMos. So that's one of the important efforts that have taken place. Then you have INS Sarvekshak. This would be basically carrying out a hydrographic survey in the waters of Tanzania in the regions close to Dar es Salaam. So that's again one of the good efforts by INS, the Indian Naval Services Systems. The next is Absurd. It's basically talking about building a kind of digital economy. So it's the first ever Asia Pacific Computer Emergency Response Team that has come up, and the conference for the same was held in New Delhi recently, and therefore it's important. The first state to adopt the LED street lights in the all urban local bodies is Rajasthan. So again a kind of direct question that could be asked here. The next is the first chat-based job search app is known as Mzilla. Now Mzilla is an app that could directly connect the recruiters and the job seekers, and based on that you would have direct connection to the recruiters for the job purposes. Now Indian nuclear project has been developing so far. So there has been developments in the advanced heavy water reactor system. You have the Bhabha Atomic Research System where you have a separate atomic energy department that has come up. Now Indra 2017, that's a kind of joint exercise between India and Russia. Numerous military exercises between various nations, a lot of name, a lot of list you would have. So off and on you have those in news. Those happened recently, are important, so just know those. The next is West Bengal's, you have the Bogue Rice. Now this is the first rice that has got the geographical indication tag, which is also known as the GIS status. This is a specialty from the Burdwan district in West Bengal, commonly found in the regions of South Damodar belt. Very important, it's basically short grain, short size and aromatic in nature, which has a sweet taste. Then you have the various seismic zones in India. Now these are important considering the quake app that we have discussed before. So you have 5 different zones that are basically talked about in India. You have the most important sections, basically the most seismic sections, which are under the zone 5 that we talk about. Then you have the seabed gold that has been discovered in the peninsular India. Now these have been identified of the following regions: the Andaman and the Lakshadweep Island group, the Mannar Basin, Chennai and Mangaluru. So of these regions you have the seabed gold coast that has been, the gold has been discovered. Then we are talking about the issues of climate change, the rising levels of sea because of melting of the glacial ice. So Arctic ice is melting and you have the glacial levels that are increasing. So those are again a concern. You have otter that has been sighted for the first time in the Krishna Century century, and the otter has been categorized into the vulnerable category now, so under the IUCN classification. So that's again important. India is planning for salt farming. So artificially we would be creating salt ponds close to the coastal areas, and India has the potential to have to become the largest producer. So far is the third largest producer after China and United States, and we are basically working on deriving salt from sea brine, lake brine, subsoil brine and rock salt deposits. So there could be again a question, which of the following could not be a source of sea salt? So the source of salt could be either of these. So again that's important. In the National Museum we have a kind of Indian historic monuments in the company painting school that has put up an exhibition there. High wind we have already talked about how it is important and how it's beneficial. It has been a project by Scotland. Then you have two projects, which is the naval offshore patrol vessels in the name of Sachi and Shruti, that have been launched at Pipavav in Gujarat. So they are the first warships that have been launched by a private sector and therefore are important, and this has been done by Reliance Defence sector as of now. So these naval offshore patrol vessels are important because they do a kind of surveillance of the exclusive economic zones in the nearby area. The next is Arunachal Pradesh is now asking for a separate time zone to be considered, and therefore it's important. Gaurav has a question about confusion between ionosphere and mesosphere. So just wait for a couple of days. We would be having the GC Leong chapter 14 soon, and there we have talked about in detail about the layers of the atmosphere. So just catch up with that lecture and it would be all set. The next is cold fusion, very important technology. Cold fusion, basically we want to do a fusion reaction at the room temperature. So that's the key aspect in a cold fusion technology. You have two reactions, fusion and fission. Fission is by breaking off the components. So when we say uranium, thorium, those break down and you have energy that's released. However, under fusion reaction we say smaller molecules join to form a bigger molecule, let's say hydrogen combined to form helium, and you have release of energy, and that's fusion. But cold fusion is a technique where fusion can actually run on a room temperature, and that's the key aspect that you need to know here. And again it's basically the interaction with the metals like palladium, zirconium and nickel in this case. Then you have Bioink, where you are trying to use living elements for the 3D printing, and that's what we say is Bioink. The next is we are talking a lot about GM mosquitoes. Those are genetically modified mosquitoes, and the AMC project by Gujarat, the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation in Gujarat, where they are basically using drones to locate the areas of mosquitoes, and basically with the slogan or a tagline Malaria Free Gujarat by 2022. So that's again important. So the cases of malaria have been registered, and there has been a significant increase. There was a significant increase in 2016, and considering that fact, you have this project that has been launched. Now railway has inducted a kind of high horsepower locomotives. Now when we rate the locomotives, it's based on certain parameters, and the reading itself is important. So let's say a locomotive has WDM3A, then here W means broad gauge, D means diesel. So if it was A, it would mean AC electric, and so on. So this diagram itself is important, so make sure you know that. It would be available in the handout, so just refer that. So you again have the IGBT technology that we talk about here, that is the insulated gate bipolar transistor system technology that we are basically enabling with the locomotives as of now. It would provide more reliability and maintenance. So those are some of the important things that we have considered and covered so far. So we have the GE locomotives that we have discussed. Now we would be coming up with one more lecture where we would be talking about the expected questions on computers, and that would be really beneficial to the students, also from those who are preparing for your NET examination. So stay tuned. If you have any further questions, keep those as comment below the video. I'll be definitely happy to resolve those. Have a great day.